That's a very important point, because what it is saying is that we have a system which we can call the belief structure, or we can call it the subconsciousness, which holds a lot of those beliefs. There are many different words that summarizes or try to describe that part of us that is always in the way. In the way of really, truly, let's say, perceiving what we receive here. Yeah, so there's a difference between receiving something and perceiving it. Because in that process is, as I just described, there are a couple of steps in between. And every step has its possibility of deformation. Even the way our whole nervous system is working is already influencing how the signal from here to here goes. You know, and again to there, and again back. Well, can you imagine what is happening in the meantime? We lost a lot of information in the first place. In the second place, we have already deformed it. So it's important to realize that. And there is a way to begin to change that. Because what is happening in most of those steps, we use one part of the brain that we call the beta frequencies, which is our active thinking mind. And that is the part that is the tricking one. Because all the other ones, most of us have insufficiently developed. And that are the ones with the alpha. Okay, many people can at least to some degree relax. But as soon as you go to theta and delta frequencies, then it becomes already more difficult. And if we want to integrate everything, we need the gamma frequencies. And science is just recently working with them because they're so subtle that they now have finally instruments to really measure them. So all those elements are playing a role in how we perceive what happens when we sit on a particular place. You know, that also influence, if we are not careful, what it is that we are giving as an interpretation of what is here. And I can guarantee you that the people from the old days were perceiving things in a different way than we did. So we have to be careful even when we try to draw conclusions and say, oh, they built it there and now I know it's this and this and that. So that's what they may have been doing there. Yeah, maybe, but maybe not. We will not know. But we do know that they selected that place. And we do know that for them it was important. So we can begin to connect again to that importance to help us in this phase of our life to understand why it could be important for us. It's not important what happened in the past. It's only important how it's working for us in this time frame. Yeah? So the brain is an interesting thing, and we, depending on how open each one will be, I'm sure we will find some opportunities to give some reflections when we go to the different points, because that's how you can, let's say, benefit as much as possible for everything that we are going to do today. You know, it's you who are determining how much you get out of it, not Jeanne or I. You know, it's your collaboration, willingness to open, willingness to share that really determines. Yeah? Okay. The natural systems. We can go, of course, when we talk about natural systems to all the electromagnetic energies that everybody is always talking about and that you can measure very easily. You know, then we go into the scientific ways of doing that. Then we can talk about fault lines, and we can talk about water flows that are under the surface of the Earth, because they all induce what we call electromagnetic measurable energies. And that's not what we would like to share with you today. Because if you want to do that, there are books. It's not really that interesting. And actually, that are not the ones that were ever used by the ancient people. The ancient people were interested in what we call the natural, and now I add a word, the natural, or maybe I should do that in red. After all, I have two colors. Natural, the subtle energies. So what are subtle energies? There are those energies that we are not yet capable of directly measuring. You know, you may already hear that I put an emphasis on directly, because you can measure the effect on human beings. So you put them on a place, put some electrodes on the person, and you can see them. Actually, the most basic grid system, the grid system being lines in the landscape, has been discovered because there was a doctor in 1950, 51 actually, Dr. Hartmann, who was doing experiments with people, and he put electrodes on their skin so you could see how the potential difference on the scale was changing during different activities of people. So when he let his people walk over a piece of land like this, they saw bleep, bleep. So every about 2.5 yards there was a bleep. And that's the beginning of the discovery of the first grid. And you may understand that other people have been doing that. So it's interesting that although it's subtle energies, there's actually science who discovered the first grid. Not, what you would say, those who are sitting and meditating. They may know about it or feel about it, but they have not defined it. So the first grid was defined that way. And in the natural subtle energies, there are actually two types that I like to separate. One is the type that we call the lower frequencies. And the other one, of course, necessarily will go into the higher ones. Do I put it right? H, sorry. The higher ones. These are the ones with all small grid systems. And these ones have the larger grid systems. And also the frequency is obviously different. Now the ones that we will mainly visit is this group. This group is something you can hardly work with. As I said, there is every 2 yards there is a line, and there is a little vortex, and you can sit on them, but your system is so used to it that you hardly feel the difference. Because one funny thing of our system is, it's trained to feel when something changes. We are walking all the time in a sea of energy. You have no idea how many different energies right now that are here, influencing your energy system, and you're not aware of it. For you, it's normal. So you have the feeling nothing's happening, but it's also because you're not opening yourself up for it. But if you really would sit here and truly open with intent, all this energy begin to work on you. But we are not used to do that way. So we are not aware of it. So we definitely are not aware of all those little grid systems that here are on this land. So you can walk through it and you don't feel it because it's too close. It's like as if you walk through, let's say, this layer of that particular type of energy and you don't notice it. You only notice it when they're out of whack. In Europe, those systems are the ones that are the cause of all the books that have been written on geopathic stress. Anybody heard of geopathic stress? Geopathic stress is a description of the effect of those little grid systems on the health of people. And the belief is that when you sleep on a cross point of those lines, you can get cancer or any other horrible whatever disease, and there is enough indication that there's a truth in that. And from the very beginning I have had difficulty with that. How would the earth be created in such a way that it would harm the beings that are living on them? It didn't make sense to me. And yes, you can say that is a logic way of thinking, but for me it didn't make sense. And I had to meet Jeanne, who has pulled me into the Sedona area, and I did a lot of my research that I did in Europe again here to begin to understand that those grids in the Sedona area, at least if you go a little bit out of the city, are not disturbed at all. They're not negative at all. So what's the case? Well, the case is that there are two factors that influence basically all grid systems. And maybe I should now define what I mean with grids before we go. When we take the surface of the earth, then that is the place where we human beings and all other beings are interacting with any energy that exists, right? So that's where it all happens. And as a consequence of that, in the same way as a consequence of the natural systems, there are lines going on the surface of the earth. They can be slightly under or above, they can move. So there are all kinds of, you can say, grid systems, energy lines, forming all kinds of models. Sometimes triangular shapes, sometimes squares, sometimes even pentagonal shapes. There are all kinds of shapes that they form, but they always form some kind of a grid. Small grids in yards, the large one. There are grids that one line to the next is 120 miles. It's a long distance, but still it's a grid, right?